The theme of worship this month is hope. It's an appropriate theme for the Advent season, the period of waiting for Christmas to come. In the Christian tradition, Advent is the point in the liturgical calendar filled with the anticipation of the turning of the year and the celebration of the birth of Jesus. It's meant to be a hopeful time. There are songs about the coming of the Messiah, the divinely anointed being whose arrival is supposed to mark the coming of the kingdom of God. Many of us Unitarian Universalists might be skeptics, atheists, or non-Christians, but we mostly join in, singing songs such as the one we sang earlier this morning with lyrics like, "Love, the guest is on the way." We even offer a beautiful Christmas Eve service where Mark and the choir will be gifting us with lovely music, and there will be candlelight and holy silence, a peaceful interlude and balm for the soul before the arrival of a new decade. This year, I admit, I've been struggling with the Advent season and the theme of hope. On the one hand, it's simply almost impossible for a Yankee like me to get into the spirit of the season when it doesn't feel like winter. We might have a hymn about the bare ground and the frosty weather outside, but it seems like summer. Where I'm from this time of year, it's dark, cold, and damp. There's snow on the ground, and you have to put on your coat, your boots, and some warm socks before you go outside. Near my parents' house, there's not even a farmer's market this time of year. And yesterday, I went to the farmer's market and bought a whole bunch of fresh vegetables and herbs. All this sunshine and warm weather makes me feel like it is at the absolute latest September. And so I find myself quite perplexed at the arrival of Advent. There is, after all, nary a snowball to be found. On the other hand, I must admit that I've been struggling with the idea of hope itself. These are difficult times. In recent months, the term climate grief has become something of the vogue. It's the sense that the climate crisis is so big and massive that there's little you or I can do about it. And it's the sense that we cannot look to either the political class or the corporate class for action. Most of them, it would appear, would rather protect their power and privilege for a few years or a few decades than take the urgent action necessary to address the climate emergency and consider restructuring society. In addition to climate grief, the New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg has started writing about democracy grief. She calls this politically induced misery, and notes that it is most often acute amongst people of color and those like myself who understand that liberal democracy is but a thin bulwark against the rise of totalitarianism. The partisan divide, revealed as the impeachment process underway, is a source for more than a little democracy grief. Such a feeling is not even limited to the United States. This week's election in the United Kingdom prompted the British business consultant and author M.R. Hawke to write, "Anglo-American society is now the world's preeminent example of willful self-destruction." When I was in London over the summer, my British friends all said some variant of the same thing. We're the only country in the history of the world that has voted to make itself poorer. The strong majority of economists think that Brexit will severely damage the British economy and cause it to shrink, just like the vast majority of climate scientists tell us that the climate situation is dire. Climate grief, and here I am with climate grief, democracy grief, and yet here I am on a Sunday morning, a couple of weeks before the new year, preaching to you about hope. I think I need a good word today as much as anybody else. Maybe we can find one together. Such a statement is a gentle reminder of the radical laicism of our tradition, the responsibility for imagining, building, sustaining the beloved community, the responsibility of finding hope, naming our dreams, and creating the society we would like to see born is shared by all of us. The Unitarian theologian William Fenn used to make this point to his students back at Harvard. "Gentlemen, let me remind you, Jesus was not a parson," he would say, his 19th century choice of gendered language itself a reminder that progress has been made on so many issues when it comes to gender. In our religious tradition, we all, ministers and congregants, have the same access to the divine. We are each part of what the theologian James Luther Adams called the priesthood and prophethood of all believers. The priest, Adams reminded us, points to holy things and offers thanks. The prophet, he instructed us, has the capacity to discern and define the actual world about us, and then discover some of the possibilities within it and the powers necessary to transform it. The priesthood and prophethood of all believers. We can each find and give each other hope. Together we develop the spiritual resources that sustain us. Between now and the end of June, Scott and I and our occasional guest preachers will be continuing to talk to you about the spiritual resources and religious practices that sustain us in times of crises. We can name some, and you might know others. If you do, I invite you to share them with each other, for it is unleashing the creativity that lies within each of us that can enable us to overcome collectively the predicament we face. Scott and I have been focusing and will continue to focus on the virtues as a resource for meeting the crises of the hour and the crises of our own lives. Our characters, the core natures of who we are formed by our virtues and vices. Our virtues are those habits of ours, those things that we do over and over again, which are praiseworthy. And hope is a virtue. It's a habit we cultivate and practice. And here I'm reminded of the Unitarian Universalist minister's Christopher Buse's parable of the two frogs. Do you know it? It seems that once there were two frogs hopping through a forest. Somehow they managed to fall into a large pot of cream. Now, don't ask me what a large pot of cream was doing in the middle of the forest. But anyways, the sides of the pot were slick and slippery, and there was no way they could climb out. The frogs had to swim and swim and swim in circles to stay afloat. One frog said to the other, "We have no hope. We are doomed to drown." The other frog said back to them, "Do not lose hope. There are bad times. There are good times. Something good may yet happen." The first frog started to lose hope and began to sink down into the cream. Their friend cried to them, "Keep hope alive, keep hope alive." And the two frogs kept swimming. Every time the first frog started to give up, the second frog inspired them by saying, "Keep hope alive." And eventually the first frog joined with the second. The words gave them strength. The frogs kept swimming. They swam, and then something amazing happened. They realized they were not sinking anymore. The cream had turned into butter. Each taking a mighty hop, they propelled themselves out of the pot and back onto the forest floor. The second frog turned to the first and said, "You should always keep hope alive. You never know what's going to happen. Cream may turn to butter." We cultivate the habit of hope when we come to understand that we humans have agency in the world, that we can act, and no matter how small our actions or how futile things might seem, what we do matters. The philosopher Terry Eagleton advises us, catastrophe is not written in the march of history, any more than hope is. However desolate the future may prove, it might always be different. One of my favorite readings in our hymnals makes something of the same point. It's number 561, and I'd like to invite you to read it with me now. The words are from the anthropologist Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of people, thoughtful, committed citizens, can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. As I've struggled with cultivating hope, I've found myself thinking about Mead's words And I've also found myself thinking about a famous painting by the German artist Friedrich Reich. It's called Checkmate. The painting and a famous anecdote about it are popular in evangelical Christian circles. The painting depicts two men playing chess. One is the devil in human guise. His hair points out like horns from underneath a helmet as he gazes out with satisfaction over the field of play. He appears to be winning the game. His pieces have advanced 2/3 of the way across the board. The devil's opponent is a young man. He sits with his head resting on one hand, staring at his own chess pieces in frustration. He's captured only 2 of the devil's pieces. The devil holds about a dozen of his. Between the 2 of them stands an angel, and she looks sympathetically at the young man. The painting is called Checkmate because the young man's position seems hopeless. The match represents the game of life, and the young man is just about to lose it to the devil. The story is told that one evening a great chess master came across a copy of the painting while at a party. He stared at it intently for a while, and then turned to his host and said, "I can take the young man's game and win." "Impossible," his host responded. So the chess master set up the board, and he invited his host to take the devil's part. And then he proceeded to seize victory from the devil. Now, when evangelical Christians offer the painting and the story as a sermon illustration, they use it to suggest that there's always hope to be found in God. The late preacher Billy Graham said that the message of the anecdote was this: there's one looking down from above who looks upon the board and says to you and me, there is a move you can make and win. And Graham's telling, of course, the move is to turn to Jesus. Now, it might not be surprising that I find a somewhat different message in the story and in the painting, for it demands something more than just putting our faith in the power of the divine. It demands that we use our imaginations and put our faith in each other. It demands that we recognize that we are each part of the priesthood and prophethood of all believers. Any of us can point to the holy possibilities latent in the world. Indeed, to paraphrase Mead, it is the only thing that has ever happened. The title of this sermon is Prayer as a Kind of Hope, and hope might be defined as the midpoint between optimism and pessimism. Last week I shared with you James Cabell's distinction between optimism and pessimism. He wrote, "The optimist proclaims that we live in the best of all possible worlds, and the pessimist fears that this is true." Optimists take the passive position. They think that good and right will win out in the end. Pessimists think that the world cannot be different than it is. The hopeful person imagines that the world can be different, but believes that transforming it requires action. Christians like Graham find hope in a belief that God is on their side. They look to the angel in the painting as a sign of divine providence and suggest we should place our faith there. The action they suggest is a surrender to God. Leaning into our tradition, I find an alternative message. For it is our move and not God's that will save us. And this need not be a humanist perspective. It might be taken to understand that when we act, God moves through us and with us, that together we cooperate with the divine to creatively find the unexpected move. With such an understanding of the divine, we might pray that we cooperate with the universe's latent holiness to bring about the world that we dream in. But even a humanist perspective offers the possibility of finding prayer to be a kind of hope. In doing so, we might reimagine what prayer is. Broadly speaking, prayer appears in a few different varieties. There are prayers of praise in which someone expresses admiration for the object of their prayer. There are prayers of gratitude in which someone offers thanksgiving to the object of their prayer. There are prayers of consecration in which someone dedicates the object of their prayer for a specific purpose. And there are prayers of petition in which someone asks the object of their prayer for aid or assistance. In each instance, prayer can be seen as an act of reaching out for connection. The person who prays seeks to rupture the individual isolation of their consciousness and discover connection to something or someone other than themselves. The person who prays, offers a prayer, acknowledges that there is something or someone outside of themselves that is worthy of admiration if they offer a prayer of praise. The person who lifts up a prayer of gratitude recognizes that they are interdependent with the world, that they should be thankful for forces and resources beyond their own. The person who provides the prayer of consecration admits that our survival and our aspirations are ever dependent upon the actions of others. And finally, the person who makes the prayer of petition recognizes that almost anything we might accomplish is completed in cooperation with others. And here I return to the painting and the chess master. In the painting, we see the angel gazing upon the young man who is losing to the devil. Perhaps this is meant to be a sign that God is ever looking after her charges and that she will intervene at the last to snatch victory from the devil. In the story, however, it is the chess master who solves the puzzle, and he does so without divine intervention. He uses his human creativity, his imagination, to develop the winning solution to the match. The solution of the young man's conundrum is not otherworldly. It was sitting there all along within his human power to obtain it. Hope is something that exists within our human power. It is a virtue, a habit we cultivate. Our liberal religious tradition is a tradition of hope. For we argue against those who believe that humanity is innately depraved, the position of the majority of the world's Christians, and claim that humans are born with possibility. Perhaps we will act for the planet's and society's ill. Perhaps we will act for its benefit. But we are given a choice, and remembering that we have a choice is the practice of hope. I want to give you now the opportunity to practice a prayer of hope. It's something that I do whenever I feel hopeless. I find a place to sit in silence. This sanctuary is as good as any. And then I ask myself the question, who can I ask for hope? This is a prayer of petition. It is reaching out for aid and assistance from another. And that other need not be the divine. It can be the human or the creaturely. It might even be a piece of music or a work of art that can unleash our imaginations and remind us that there is so much beauty and creativity in the world. Who can I ask for hope? I invite you to sit in silence for a couple of minutes with that question. Who can I ask for hope? Now let me make a confession. There have been times in my own life when I've felt that I was without help. And I've asked this question, and I've found that I could answer it. Who can I ask for help? Some years ago, as I was struggling through my divorce and it felt like my family was falling apart, I asked this question and discovered the answer in my friends and family and in my Unitarian Universalist community. Who can I ask for help? As a child, I battled dyslexia, and as a student, I found that I could find the answer by turning to teachers and other students for aid. Who can I ask for hope? At each moment in my life when I have struggled, I have found that there was an answer to this question, that there was someone, some group of people, some resource within me or without me that could help me answer the question. And today, when I struggle with climate grief and democracy grief, I learned that I can answer by looking to the young people and the social movements who refuse the very idea that the future has yet been written, who believe that it is not too late to act, to change, to find a new way of being. They may yet be right. No one really knows what will come next. Even the data analytics whizzes can at best give us probabilities about what will happen. Who can I ask for help? In this Advent season, in this time of waiting for the new year and the new decade, as we sit on the precipice of what may be the most important period of human history, I invite you to ask that question. Who can I ask for help? Who can we ask for help? And then, as you sit in silence with that petitionary prayer, I invite you to imagine at least one answer to it, and that help may be found in this gathered community of the priesthood and prophethood of all believers. For is it not the mission of this congregation to help each other, to love the world as best we can, to bind up the broken and build the beloved community? Is this not what we pledged to each other earlier today in our new member ceremony? To offer support in times of trouble, to lift a lamp to light the way when we find ourselves in periods of doubt. We close now with a refrain from Pablo Neruda's poem from earlier. Verses remind us that we might find hope, like frogs in the pot of cream, or the chess master and the young man in the painting, or maybe others of the community, not by ourselves, but by coming together. And since then I am, because you are, and since you are, I am, we are. And through love, we will be, we will be, we will be. And let the congregation say, Amen.